Homes. Are they for shelter or for getting rich? Today, the global elite treat real estate like a massive stock market. Over the past 20 years, housing prices have outpaced wage increases by a wide margin. Trillion-dollar funds are buying up thousands of homes simply to leave them vacant or rent them out. For the average citizen, buying a home is now a pipe dream. But what if, tomorrow, investment-driven home purchases were completely banned worldwide? Within just the first 24 hours, the financial markets would experience the greatest shock in history. Speculators, investment funds, and those owning multiple homes would panic and rush to sell. Millions of homes would flood the market overnight, but there would be no investor buyers. A surge in supply and a collapse in demand would rapidly drive down housing prices. According to experts, global housing prices would lose between 40% and 60% of their value. This sharp decline would first shake the banking system to its core. As home values plummet, the mortgage-backed collateral held by banks would evaporate. A liquidity crisis, similar to the 2008 crisis, but far more severe, would begin. Real estate investment funds would either go completely bankrupt or be liquidated. Central banks would be forced to print trillions of dollars to save the system. Large capital would flee real estate in search of safe havens. Billions of dollars would flow into gold, cryptocurrencies, and artificial intelligence companies. This massive capital shift would propel tech giants to unprecedented heights on the stock markets. However, on the flip side, the real economy would grind to a halt. The construction sector would grind to a halt. Cement, steel, and furniture factories would be unable to secure orders. Hundreds of subsectors dependent on construction would collapse, and global unemployment would suddenly rise above 15%. Governments would be forced to confront massive protests by the masses who had lost their jobs. As the system crumbled, a major group of winners would emerge from the ruins: the middle and lower classes, who had been struggling to pay rent for years. With housing prices falling by half, even those who simply wanted a place to live could become homeowners. One of the greatest wealth transfers in history would take place, pushing the homeownership rate up to 90%. People would no longer have to spend half their paychecks on rent or heavy mortgage payments. Thanks to increased disposable income, small businesses, restaurants, and the arts sector would thrive. For left-wing politicians, this would be the ultimate triumph of the welfare state and equality, just as it was with the harsh wealth taxes implemented by the Nordic countries in the past. However, most economists warn that this utopian scenario would not last very long, because banning investment would trigger a dark crisis that no one could have predicted. A crisis of unavailability of rental housing. If no one could buy a home to invest in and rent out, what would those without the down payment to buy a home do? There would be no rental housing left on the market for students, new job seekers, or those temporarily relocating to another city. Existing rental properties would quickly end up on the black market. Rents would skyrocket through under-the-table, illegal transactions. Just as Berlin's rent-freeze law dried up the market, a ban would eliminate the supply of rental housing. At this point, the only solution is for the government to become the world's largest real estate developer. As in the Singapore model, the state would be forced to build social housing for rent and sale itself. However, This would create massive deficits in government budgets, and taxes would rise dramatically. Billionaires, meanwhile, would not sit idly by. They would find loopholes, such as company housing or registering properties in relatives' names, to circumvent the ban. Enforcing the ban would turn into an impossible battle, requiring thousands of bureaucrats and inspectors. Society would be split in two, those celebrating having secured a home at a low cost, and cities with collapsing economies. With no investors, no one would renovate old buildings. Urban renewal would come to a halt. City centers would gradually begin to deteriorate and decay due to neglect. However, in the long term, 10 to 15 years later, the market could settle into a new, more community-focused equilibrium. People would stop viewing real estate as a source of rent and focus on entrepreneurship. Once the rent-seeking economy ended, capital would shift toward real innovation, science, and production. Perhaps this radical decision would serve as a catalyst to accelerate humanity's technological leap. Cities would be designed not with skyscrapers for rent-seeking, but with spacious parks for livability. However, it must not be forgotten that every strict regulation in history has created its own side effects. Perhaps, instead of a total ban, smart tax systems like those in Switzerland or Austria would make more sense. In conclusion, removing real estate from its role as merely an investment vehicle would fundamentally transform the world. Short-term economic devastation and chaos could give rise to a more equitable society in the long run. The question is, do governments have the courage to undertake this major surgical intervention? Or will the global real estate lobby and the billionaire class never allow it? Do you think a home should be a constitutional right or a stock that can be bought and sold? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Let's say the ban is actually enforced. What would happen on the streets during the first month of the ban? Hundreds of thousands of real estate consultants and agents would suddenly find themselves out of work. The concept of a real estate commission would become a thing of the past. However, a golden age would begin for lawyers. Thousands of lawsuits would be filed over canceled contracts. The ultra-luxury developments purchased by the wealthy as investments would turn into ghost towns because maintenance fees go unpaid. The luxury segment would be the category suffering the greatest loss in value due to a lack of buyers. Pension funds that invested in real estate funds suffer massive losses. Ordinary people's retirement dreams evaporate with the collapse of real estate funds. Governments announce massive bailout packages to rescue the public's retirement funds. The trillions of new currency units printed will reawaken the monster of inflation on a global scale. Homes become cheaper, but the prices of bread and energy spiral out of control. Economic theory tells us that any balance disrupted by human intervention will eventually explode elsewhere. As investment in major cities dries up, mega projects are canceled, and migration to rural areas begins. People turn to farmland to build their own homes on the now cheaper plots of land. This situation leads to unplanned development on agricultural land and jeopardizes food security. Food crises begin to replace the housing crisis. What about short-term rentals? Platforms like Airbnb would collapse entirely. Hundreds of thousands of apartments held for investment purposes in tourist cities would flood the market. In cities like Venice and Barcelona, locals would celebrate reclaiming their cities. However, local businesses would face the threat of closing their doors due to a lack of tourists. Wealthy expats and digital nomads would migrate to free zones where these restrictions do not apply. Cities like Dubai or Monaco would take control of all the world's real estate capital. These countries would experience an unprecedented construction boom and economic growth. The global balance of economic power would shift entirely with just a single regulation. Setting macroeconomics aside, how would individuals' psychology change? Fears like, will I be able to pay my rent? Or will my landlord evict me? Would come to an end. As anxiety about the future diminished, marriage and birth rates would rise. The greatest income inequality between the boomer generation and the Z and Y generations would be eliminated. Inheritance disputes within families would decrease significantly, since homes would be nothing more than shelter. People would view their homes as places to live rather than as investment vehicles, and would embrace them more fully. The quality of building materials would improve, with insulation and durability taking center stage. The build-to-sell mentality, where homes are built to last only 10 years, would become a thing of the past. The quality of architecture would improve, and aesthetically pleasing reinforced concrete structures would replace the existing ones. Neighborhood culture would be reborn. Neighborly bonds would strengthen, along with a sense of belonging. Luxury residences, unused and reserved solely for the wealthy to park their cars, would be demolished and opened to the public. According to sociologists, this would be the greatest step toward alleviating the alienation of modern humans. However, human nature and capitalism are masters at finding loopholes. Large conglomerates would begin to present these homes not as investments, but as staff guest houses. Through shell foundations established abroad, these residences would don the mask of commercial real estate. Corruption and bribery in the agencies tasked with oversight would reach record levels. Since home ownership was banned, the wealthy would engage in power struggles outside the real estate sector. Investors would this time attempt to gain control over agricultural land and clean water sources. While the housing crisis was being resolved, humanity might have faced an even more critical food and water crisis. Capital would shift from property ownership to intellectual property, and patent wars would begin. Technology companies would transform into an oligarchy more powerful than even governments have ever been in history. This is because technology and data networks would become the world's sole means of storing value. People would even buy and sell real estate in the metaverse worth trillions, property they couldn't acquire in the physical world. As a result, even if physical housing became cheaper, wealth would remain trapped in the virtual world. What we've described here isn't entirely science fiction. A similar step was taken in Berlin in 2020. The Berlin state government passed a law freezing rents for 5 years and capping investors' profits. At first, tenants celebrated, and left-wing politicians were hailed as heroes. However, within just a few months, the supply of rental housing on the market plummeted by 41%. Landlords put their rental properties up for sale or demanded illegal key money under the guise of furniture fees. Living in Berlin became impossible for students or immigrants new to the city. In 2021, the German Constitutional Court struck down the law. But the damage was extensive. After the repeal, rents skyrocketed to even higher levels than before. and trust was lost. This incident served as the clearest lesson on the point where market dynamics clash with social justice. Increasing supply is always a more effective model than banning or freezing investment. Take Vienna, for example. 60% of the city's housing is owned by the municipality or cooperatives. Rather than banning investment, the government's provision of affordable housing already balances the market. So if a total ban causes so much damage, how can the right to fair housing be ensured? The solution lies in the progressive and stringent investment taxes implemented by countries like Singapore. Is it your first home? No tax. Is it your second home? A 20% tax. Your third? A 60% tax. This makes buying a home for investment purposes mathematically illogical. The influx of foreign capital and speculators into the market is completely halted. Where do these massive tax revenues go? They are returned exclusively to low-income individuals purchasing their first home in the form of affordable loans and social housing funds. This is the most modern way to transfer wealth without bringing down the system. So you might ask yourself, if this makes so much sense, why don't all countries do it? Because most politicians and lawmakers around the world are real estate investors themselves. Construction lobbies are the biggest financiers of political parties. They don't want to cut off the branch they're sitting on. The media is also part of this cycle. The housing opportunity stories pumped out every day are proof of this. Beyond all these debates, investment-driven construction has another hidden impact: our environment. Nearly 40% of global carbon emissions come from the construction and real estate sectors. Every skyscraper built not out of necessity but simply for the sake of investment means millions of metric tons of carbon. If investment were banned, global carbon emissions would drop by 15% overnight. For climate activists, ending real estate investment is one of the fastest ways to save the world. The destruction of forests and their conversion into luxury developments would stop immediately. It would spell the end of global sand lobbies and illegal excavation that are ruining riverbeds. However, while saving the climate, failing to build homes for a growing population would create another humanitarian crisis. The solution is to produce sustainable housing only as needed, and by repurposing existing buildings. The massive office towers left vacant after 2020 could have been converted into housing for the homeless and low-income residents. Since investor profits would not be the top priority, buildings would be constructed to be far more resilient to earthquakes and other disasters. Human life would become more valuable than prices per square meter. Humanity's desire to own land and property dates back thousands of years. In ancient times, feudal lords monopolized land. Today, large investment funds monopolize housing. In society, being a tenant is seen as a sign of inferiority, while being a homeowner is seen as a status symbol. An investment ban would force society to shift from a property-centric mindset to an access-centric one. Just like car-sharing systems, housing could evolve into a flexible, needs-based network. Rather than putting down roots in one place, people would more readily embrace the idea of being global citizens. In Switzerland and Germany, more than half the population is already happily renting for life. This is because tenant rights are extremely strong in these countries, and rents are kept under control. In a world where such a ban existed, the entire system would be forced to evolve toward this Swiss model. However, there is another, less visible side to the coin. Developing countries whose economies rely solely on construction and real estate speculation would experience a complete collapse. As we saw in the Evergrande crisis in China, the bursting of a construction bubble shakes the entire country. Let's say the ban was implemented, crises occurred, and 10 years have passed. What kind of place would the world be? Markets would have accepted the new reality and found a new equilibrium. Housing costs would account for only 15% of people's income, rather than 50%. People would use the money left over to start their own businesses, and innovation records would be broken. As capital shifted from concrete to industry, production capacity would increase tremendously. Homes would no longer be viewed as a commercial commodity, but rather as an infrastructure service, such as roads and water. Home prices would not rise even slightly above the inflation rate. They would remain stable. One of the world's largest income inequality gaps would be closed. The heir class, those who grew wealthy simply because the value of their homes increased, would disappear. Wealth would be concentrated in the hands of workers, producers, and innovators. This, in turn, would elevate social peace and meritocracy to an unprecedented level. To sum up, what does this whole scenario tell us? Banning the purchase of real estate for investment purposes is not a magic bullet. It is major surgery that will put the world on a sickbed, a procedure that will be painful in the short term, but life-saving in the long term. In free market economies, outright bans always give rise to a black market. A smarter approach is to use taxes to make real estate rents unprofitable. Once the system becomes unprofitable, capital will naturally migrate to more productive sectors on its own. However, it is a fact that the current system is unsustainable. On one side, millions of vacant homes. On the other, millions of people sleeping on the streets. Sooner or later, this system will collapse under its own weight. Solving humanity's housing problem is much easier than going to Mars. All it takes is the will to do so. So, what do you think the solution is? A total ban, heavy taxes, or the government building affordable housing? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. See you in the next video. Take care.